Celia Dalton stepped off the train with a suitcase in one hand and a heart full of nerves, not realizing the man who followed behind her, tall, quiet, and dressed in a crisp black coat, would fall head over heels in love with her. She adjusted her grip on the handle, squinting into the soft morning sun that bathed the platform of Willow Creek, a sleepy town nestled between pine-covered hills. The scent of fresh coffee and wildflowers drifted on the breeze. She hadn't been here since her grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. "Excuse me," a deep voice said behind her as she turned to get her bearings. She glanced up. The man, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, his dark hair tousled just enough to not look styled, stood beside a sleek leather duffel. His eyes were an unreal shade of slate gray, and he didn't look like he belonged in a town with one grocery store and a diner that still had a jukebox. "Oh, sorry," Celia said quickly, stepping aside. "No, you're fine," he said, his voice smooth but unreadable. "Didn't mean to crowd you." She gave a polite nod and turned away, her boots crunching on gravel as she made her way toward the cab stand. The other passengers dispersed around them. The man didn't follow. She didn't look back. The cabbie loaded her suitcase and raised an eyebrow. "Heading to the Dalton property," she blinked. "Yeah, you remember me," he chuckled. "Celia Dalton, you used to sneak out of Sunday school to fish behind the hardware store." She laughed despite herself. "Guilty." The drive through town was short but jarring. The bookstore was now a coffee shop, the gas station had doubled in size, and the old apple orchard had been replaced by a gated property she didn't recognize. "Who lives there now?" she asked, pointing. "Some rich guy from the city, bought it cash, real private." "Name's Quinlan something." "Quinlan," she repeated, vaguely remembering the name from somewhere. "Is he, I don't know, part of a tech company or something? No clue, keeps to himself, but he's been good for the town. Donated a new library, fixed the rec center." The cab rolled up the winding dirt road to her grandmother's cottage, now hers, thanks to a will she hadn't expected to receive. Celia paid the fare and stepped out. The paint was still peeling, but the porch swing hadn't changed. She smiled, reaching for the key in her coat pocket. Behind her, another car pulled up. A black SUV, the window rolled down. "Small world," said the man from the train, her eyebrows lifted. "You again." He stepped out, holding his duffel under one arm. "Quinlan Maddox," her heart hiccuped. "Wait, Quinlan? As in the guy who bought the old orchard?" He gave a half shrug. "Guilty," she blinked. "You're the millionaire." "I didn't know that was public knowledge. In this town. Everyone knows what brand of cereal you buy." He laughed an actual laugh, and the sound was warm and disarming. "Fair enough. What are you doing here?" she asked. He nodded toward the small house next door, the one that had been empty for years. "Bought the place next to you." "It came with the orchard, didn't realize anyone lived here." "I just got here," she said. "Inherited the place." "Well," he glanced around the quiet woods. "Looks like we're neighbors, apparently." He hesitated. "Do you need help fixing the place up?" "I've got some contractors coming tomorrow to work on the fence. Could tell them to stop by." Thanks, but I can manage." "Sure." He gave her a long look. "Offer stands." Celia nodded, watching him walk back to the SUV and disappear down the road. Her chest felt oddly tight, she didn't know why. By the time evening fell, she had unpacked a few boxes and wrestled the electricity back from the dead. She lit a candle and collapsed onto the old couch, her legs aching. A knock startled her. She opened the door to find Quinlan standing there, holding a brown paper bag. "Dinner," he said simply. "The diner sent too much." She opened her mouth to argue, but then the smell hit her: fried chicken, mac and cheese, cornbread. "You bribing me with carbs, I'm bribing you with comfort." She stepped aside. "Fine, come in. Just don't judge the mess." He walked in like he belonged, setting the bag down on the coffee table and pulling out cartons. "You have plates?" "Somewhere," she muttered, rummaging through a box. They ate on the couch, boxes between them. He asked about her childhood, and she asked about how he ended up in Willow Creek. "I needed out of New York," he said. "The pace, the noise, I lost track of who I was." "You're young to be retired," she said. "I'm not retired," he said. "I still run things, just—" From a distance now, she considered him. "What do you do?" "Software, security tech." "Explains the gates and the SUV." He smiled at her, but it wasn't arrogant, it was warm. What about you? What brought you back? My grandmother left me the cottage. I've been floating for a while. Figured I'd fix it up, maybe stay a bit. His gaze softened. You were close. She was my favorite person in the world. They were quiet for a moment. You look like someone who's been hurt, he said gently. She looked down at her food. Don't we all? He didn't push. And somehow that made her feel safer than anything else had in years. The next few days passed in a blur. Quinlan kept showing up first with a toolbox, then with coffee, then with a new front porch swing wrapped in a bow. You bought me furniture? She asked, stunned. You said the old one creaked. That doesn't mean I expected you to replace it. I wanted to. He said it so simply, so sincerely that she couldn't argue. And when he invited her to dinner, real dinner, white tablecloths, a restaurant hidden in the hills with candles and views of the lake, she said yes. She wore a simple navy dress and borrowed her grandmother's earrings. He wore a button-down and a jacket that probably cost more than her rent used to be. You clean up nice, she said as he opened the car door for her. So do you, he said quietly. Too nice, actually, might be a problem. Oh yeah. I might have a hard time not staring at you all night. She flushed, caught off guard. You don't even know me. I'm trying to, he said, his voice steady. And so far, I like what I see. They didn't kiss that night. But she lay awake for hours after, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell was happening to her heart. She had stepped off the train just days ago, expecting nothing. And now she couldn't stop thinking about the man next door. The first sign that everything was about to change came in the form of a storm. Celia had stepped outside early that morning to check the gutters before the rain set in, only to find Quinlan already on a ladder, sleeves rolled to his elbows, water dripping from his hair. You're going to break your neck, she called up. He looked down, rain beating along his lashes. Not if you hold the ladder, she crossed her arms. You could have asked. I figured it was easier to ask forgiveness. Not when my homeowner's insurance doesn't cover arrogant millionaires falling off roofs. He grinned and climbed down, wiping his hands on a rag pulled from his back pocket. Noted. Next time, I'll send a formal request in triplicate. Her eyes narrowed. You're never this casual in town. You're like a ghost at the market, but out here you're practically cheerful. He leaned against the porch railing, the tension in his posture betraying the ease in his tone. That's because out here people don't want anything from me. Celia tilted her head. What would anyone want from you? Everything, he said simply. Access, endorsements, money, you name it. She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she reached for the rag and wiped her own hands, avoiding his gaze. He changed the subject. There's a fair this weekend, about 20 minutes out in Belridge. You ever been? Not since I was a kid. I haven't been to one in my life. She raised an eyebrow. You've never been to a fair? I grew up in Boston. Fairs weren't exactly part of the curriculum. She hesitated, then smiled. All right, I'll take you. He looked genuinely startled. Yeah, sure. But only if you promise not to wear anything that costs more than my car. I can manage that. The rain came hard that night. Thunder cracked across the hills, and the power flickered twice before giving out completely. Celia lit a lantern and wrapped herself in a blanket by the fireplace. The wind howled outside, and she was halfway through an old book when she heard a knock. She opened the door to find Quinlan holding a thermos and 2 flashlights. Your lights out too? He asked. She stepped aside without answering, and he entered, brushing water from his jacket. I brought this, he said, holding up the thermos. Hot cider, my generator's still running. She accepted it, fingers brushing his. You always show up at the right time. I don't plan it, he said. I just don't like thinking of you here alone in the dark. She didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she poured them both a cup and sat across from him on the rug, the fire casting flickering shadows around them. They talked about nothing and everything, the weirdest jobs they'd ever had, the worst meals they'd ever cooked, the most embarrassing things they'd done in public. Celia laughed more that night than she had in months. At one point, she leaned back on her elbows and looked at him through firelight. What's the one thing you miss most? He stared at the flames for a long moment. Silence. You don't strike me as the type with a loud life. It's not the noise from people, it's the pressure, the constant movement, the expectations. It gets so loud you forget what you were before it all, she nodded slowly. I know that feeling, he looked at her. Do you? I spent years trying to be what other people wanted. I think I forgot how to want something for myself. He didn't speak. But his gaze lingered on her like he was seeing more than she let on. The storm passed by morning. The sun broke through clouds and the scent of wet pine filled the air. Celia woke to find a note on her porch, written in bold, clean handwriting. Don't forget, Saturday, I'll drive. She tucked it into her coat pocket, her heart hammering for reasons she didn't want to name. Saturday arrived with crisp air and golden light. Quinlan pulled up in a vintage truck that looked like it had been restored with surgical precision. He wore jeans and a black sweater rolled to his forearms. He looked younger, looser. I can't believe you're doing this, she said as she climbed in. He handed her a bag of kettle corn. I'm making up for lost time. The fairgrounds were crowded when they arrived. Children ran past with balloons and the air buzzed with laughter and the scent of roasted peanuts. Quinlan watched it all like someone seeing color for the first time. Where to first? She asked. He pointed to the Ferris wheel. You're afraid of heights, aren't you? Terrified. You're serious, he nodded. But I trust you, her breath caught. She didn't answer. Instead, she led him to the line, their fingers brushing once, twice, until he finally reached for her hand. They rode the Ferris wheel in silence, the sky widening around them. At the top, he looked down, then at her. I thought I'd feel panic, he said, but I don't. Why not? Because you're here. The words hit her like thunder in the chest. When they reached the ground again, he didn't let go of her hand. Later, they wandered through rows of vendors. Quinlan bought her a delicate silver bracelet from a woman with a weathered face and kind eyes. He didn't ask her size. He just fastened it around her wrist like he'd known it would fit. It's too much, she said quietly. No, he replied. It's not enough. They ended the night watching fireworks from the truck bed, a blanket wrapped around both of them. He didn't kiss her, but he wrapped an arm around her shoulders and let her rest her head against him. She felt safe. And that more than the bracelet, more than the cider or the porch swing terrified her. Because safety meant comfort and comfort meant attachment. And attachment meant heartbreak. The next morning she found another note, dinner, my place, tonight. It was the first time he'd invited her into his world. She stared at the note for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it in her dresser drawer. Then she went to find something to wear, not because she needed to impress him, but because, for the first time in years, she wanted to feel beautiful. Celia stepped carefully onto Quinlan's stone walkway, her boots clicking softly as she approached the tall, weathered front door. The house next to hers had always been empty, but now the once abandoned structure had been transformed. Warm golden light spilled from tall windows framed by dark shutters, and faint piano music floated into the night air. She paused at the threshold and drew in a breath. The scent of cedar and rosemary drifted out into the crisp evening. Before she could knock, the door opened. You're right on time, Quinlan said, holding the door wide. She stepped in and immediately felt out of place. The interior was rich with deep wood finishes, clean lines, and curated warmth. A fire glowed in the hearth to the right, and a long dining table was set beneath a chandelier of blown glass. Everything gleamed, but not in a showy way. It was elegant, intentional. I didn't know this was hiding behind that old porch, she said, turning in place. I like to keep the outside quiet, he answered, closing the door behind her, and the inside peaceful. You designed this, he nodded. I had help. But I oversaw every inch. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of a narrow console table carved from rosewood. It's beautiful. You are, too, he said, not missing a beat. She turned toward him, the compliment striking in its simplicity. He wasn't trying to charm her, he just meant it. He gestured toward the open kitchen. Dinner's almost ready. I hope you like halibut. I've never had it, she admitted. Then I'll count myself lucky to be your first. She followed him in, watching as he plated the food with a practiced hand. The kitchen was sleek, with black marble counters and matte brass fixtures. A copper pan still steamed on the stove. You cook? She asked, genuinely curious. I had to learn, he said, setting a plate in front of her. I can't stand frozen dinners, and I don't like strangers in my space every night. As they sat across from each other, the firelight flickered behind them, casting a soft glow that made the moment feel suspended. The food was delicate but rich, the wine he poured smooth and dry. She looked at him across the table. "Why did you really come to Willow Creek, Quinlan?" He put down his fork and considered her. "You want the polished answer or the real one, always real?" He leaned back slightly. "I sold my company after a merger went south. I had more money than I knew what to do with, and no one left I trusted. I didn't want to be in rooms where every conversation had an agenda. So I found a map, closed my eyes, and dropped my finger on a place I'd never heard of. I gave myself one condition: stay long enough to remember what silence feels like." She tilted her head. "And, have you remembered?" "Not until recently," he said, eyes steady on hers. Her breath caught, but she masked it with a sip of wine. After dinner, he led her to the sitting room. A grand piano stood by the window, its surface shining under the soft light. She ran her hand across the keys. "Do you play?" she asked. "I used to. My mother forced lessons until I was 16. I hated it then. And now I play when my hands won't stay still." "Will you?" He paused, then sat on the bench. His fingers hovered before pressing down, coaxing out a quiet, haunting melody she didn't recognize. She sat beside him, watching the way his jaw tightened slightly with each note. "What's that called?" she whispered. He stopped playing. "It doesn't have a name. I wrote it the day I signed away my company." She looked at his hands. "Do you miss it?" "Parts of it," he said. "But not the way it made me feel." He turned to her then, close enough that she could smell the faint cedar on his skin. "You make it easier to breathe," he said simply. That time, he didn't wait for her to respond. He leaned in and kissed her softly, reverently, like a man who knew exactly what he was risking. Her hand moved to his shoulder, and she kissed him back. When they pulled apart, there was no awkwardness. Only a quiet understanding that something between them had changed. She left a few hours later, walking back to her cottage under a sky full of stars. The bracelet he'd given her days ago glinted at her wrist with each step. The next morning, she found a small envelope tucked under her door, no name on the outside. Inside was a single, elegant card. "There's something I need to tell you. Come by tonight." Her stomach flipped. That evening, she returned to his house. The lights were on, but the front door stood ajar. She stepped inside, calling his name. He was in the study, pacing. A bottle of scotch sat open on the desk, untouched. When he saw her, he stopped moving. "I'm not who you think I am," he said. She folded her arms. "You already told me you're a millionaire who used to run a company. That's a pretty big start." He shook his head. "It's not just that." She waited. He took a breath. "The merger that happened. It wasn't clean. I didn't lose the company I walked because I found out my partners were selling client data. I threatened to expose them. They buried me in lawsuits, dragged my name through every paper they could buy." She stared at him. "Then why not fight?" "I tried, but they had leverage. Personal things I didn't want made public." "Like what?" He looked away. "My father was arrested for fraud when I was 17. I spent years building a perfect image to keep that from surfacing. They found out, used it." She stepped closer. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I don't want to be someone else around you, and because I know what it looks like when a man hides things. I've seen it destroy good things before." She reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you for telling me." He stared at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of what I've done?" "No," she said, "because I don't think you've done anything wrong. You did the right thing, even when it cost you." His shoulders dropped slightly, like he'd been holding his breath for days. "Stay," he said quietly. She nodded. Later that night, as they sat curled together on the couch, she looked at him and said, "You're not the only one with history, Quinlan." He didn't press, but she knew soon she'd have to tell him everything, about what she'd left behind. About why she hadn't just come to Willow Creek to fix up a cottage, but to escape a mistake she hadn't yet dared to name. Celia stood barefoot on the back deck of Quinlan's house, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the dense line of trees beyond the orchard. The sun had barely risen, casting soft orange light across the mist-covered hills. She hadn't slept. Neither had he. Inside, she could hear him moving quiet, controlled. He hadn't asked why she woke so early or why she hadn't gone back to her own cottage. He just handed her a blanket and stepped away to give her space. He always knew when to lean in and when to pull back. It terrified her more than if he'd been the type to push. She turned when she heard the sound of the screen door opening. He stepped out, 2 mugs in hand. "It's not the coffee from town," he said, "but it's strong enough to get us through a morning like this." She took the mug, her fingers brushing his. "I need to tell you something." He didn't sit. He stood beside her, silent. She took a breath. "Before I came here, I was engaged." He didn't flinch. He just waited. "I walked away 2 weeks before the wedding," she continued, her voice steady. "He was charming, respected, successful. Everyone loved him. And I kept thinking, maybe if I just tried harder, I'd love him the way I was supposed to." She looked at the trees again, like they could absorb what she was afraid to face. "Then one night I found out he'd taken out a loan in my name, without asking, without even blinking. He said it was temporary, that he'd pay it back, but it wasn't just the money, it was the way he made it feel like my fault, like I'd forced his hand." Quinlan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I packed a bag that night, didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just got on a train and ended up here." "You didn't just end up here," he said quietly. "You came back to something that felt like yours." She nodded. "I wanted to remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit someone else's idea of me." He reached out and took the mug from her hand, setting it on the railing. Then he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing just below her eye. "You don't shrink," he said. "You never did. You just forgot." Her chest tightened and something inside her cracked open. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I don't want to be afraid of needing someone," she whispered. "You don't have to need me," he said. "But I'm here if you want me." She kissed him, then not soft, not tentative. It was a kiss that tasted of morning air and long-held truths of choices made and futures rewritten. When they parted, he smiled not with his mouth, but with the kind of warmth that reached all the way to his eyes. "I have something for you," he said. She followed him inside, past the kitchen, down a hallway she hadn't explored before. At the end was a room filled with soft afternoon light and canvases stacked against the walls. "I didn't know you painted," she said, stepping closer. "I don't. Not well anyway, but I like to try." He pulled one canvas forward, revealing a painting of the cottage hers framed by wildflowers, the roof slanted, the porch swing perfectly detailed. "I made it the first week you got here," he said, "before I even knew your name. I saw you standing on that porch, looking like the whole world had just landed on your shoulders, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." She looked at the painting, then at him. "You saw me before I saw you. I saw you the second you stepped off that train." Her throat tightened. "You were behind me." "I was." She touched the edge of the canvas. "You kept this." "I didn't know why at first, now I do." They stood in silence, then she turned to him, hands trembling slightly. "Come with me," she said, "to where? My grandmother's garden. There's something I haven't done yet." They walked back to the cottage, hand in hand. She led him around the side, where the overgrown path wound toward a stone bench surrounded by rose bushes and climbing ivy. In the center was a rusted trellis, its ironwork twisted with age. "My grandmother used to sit here and write letters," she said. "She never mailed them. She just believed that saying the truth out loud mattered more than whether someone heard it." She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this before I left the city. I never thought I'd read it out loud." Quinlan sat beside her, waiting. She unfolded the paper, her voice steady. "Dear Celia, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are not a series of mistakes stitched together by guilt. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to begin again." When she finished, she let the silence settle. Quinlan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You didn't begin again," he said. "You just returned to who you always were." She looked at him, tears gathering. "So what now?" He stood, pulling her gently up with him. "Now we make a new beginning together." She blinked. "Together?" "I bought the old firehouse downtown," he said. "I'm turning it into a community center, art classes, workshops, a place for people to find themselves again." She stared. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need someone who understands what it means to start over, someone who sees people the way you do." Her voice caught. "You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a life if you want it." She laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't play small, do you?" I never have, but I've never played for the right reasons until now. She stepped into his arms, holding him tightly. I want it, all of it. A week later, the town gathered for the fall festival. Celia stood beside Quinlan under a canopy of twinkling lights, holding a mug of spiced cider, her cheeks flushed with laughter. The old orchard had been transformed, lanterns strung from tree to tree, music echoing through the hills. Mayor Clarkson tapped a fork against his glass, drawing attention. We've got a few announcements tonight, but first, I'd like to thank the man responsible for restoring the orchard, rebuilding the library, and bringing life back to Willow Creek. Quinlan stepped forward, clearing his throat. I didn't come here to be seen. I came here to remember who I was. And somewhere along the way, I found something I didn't know I was missing. He turned, reaching for Celia's hand. I found her. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Celia's heart stopped. You told me once you didn't want to be afraid of needing someone. I don't want you to need me. I just want you to choose me, every day. She covered her mouth, tears falling freely now. Celia Dalton, will you marry me? She dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing through her tears. Yes. Yes, of course I will. The crowd erupted around them, but all she could see was him. She'd stepped off a train with a suitcase and a fractured heart. And somehow, impossibly, she'd landed in the arms of the man who would never let her forget who she truly was. Celia adjusted the lapel of her navy coat as she stood outside the old firehouse, now completely transformed. The brick facade had been carefully restored, the large garage doors replaced with tall glass panels that revealed the bright, open space inside. The new community center was officially open, and the grand opening gala was already underway. Music drifted out from the open doors, mingling with the warm November air. She hesitated on the threshold, watching as people from Willow Creek mingled inside older couples she remembered from childhood, teenagers clutching cups of cider, families marveling at the art displays lining the walls. She spotted Mrs. Carter, the town's former librarian, laughing near the dessert table, and Sawyer from the hardware store helping a group of kids with a paint demonstration in the corner. Then she felt the familiar warmth of a hand on the small of her back. You look like you're about to run, Quinlan said, his voice low behind her. I'm not used to being part of something this big, she replied, not taking her eyes off the crowd. He leaned in, his breath brushing her ear. You didn't just become part of it, you built it. She turned to face him. We did. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, the corners slightly worn. She frowned. What's that? He handed it to her. The original blueprint of the firehouse, found it in the town archives a few days ago. Thought you'd want it. She unfolded it carefully, a grin tugging at her lips as she studied the faded lines and hand-scribbled notes. This is incredible. We should frame it. We will, he said. In the front hall, beside your first event flyer. She looked up at him. You've thought about all this, haven't you? I think about everything that involves you. His answer was so quiet, so natural, it made her chest go tight with something that wasn't fear anymore. Inside, the music changed. A soft jazz standard filled the space, and several couples began drifting toward the open area near the center of the room. Quinlan extended a hand. Dance with me. She hesitated only a second before setting the blueprint aside and taking his hand. He led her into the center of the room, where the lights were dimmed just enough for the world to soften around them. As they moved together, she let her head rest against his shoulder, breathing in the subtle scent of cedar and something warmer beneath it, the scent she now associated with safety, with home. You know, she murmured, I never thought I'd find this. He pulled back just enough to see her face. This kind of peace. I didn't think I was capable of it, he said, but you changed everything. The song lingered, and they didn't speak again for a while. They didn't need to. Later that night, as they returned to the cottage, she still insisted on calling hers. Celia lit candles in the windows while Quinlan uncorked a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. The air was crisp, the fire crackling in the hearth, and the night wrapped around them like a secret. She curled up beside him on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. Do you ever miss it? What? The life you left behind, he considered it for a moment. Sometimes, but not in the way you'd think, I miss parts of the challenge, the adrenaline, but not the loneliness. Not the version of me I had to be to survive there. She ran her fingers along the seam of his shirt. I'm glad you found your way here. I didn't find my way here, he said. I followed something I couldn't explain. And it led me to you. For the first time, she spoke the words that had been building in her chest for weeks. I love you. His eyes locked onto hers. Say it again. I love you, she repeated, smiling now. He kissed her slowly, deeply. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how much I love you back. They sat in silence after that, the firelight dancing across the walls, wrapped in the kind of quiet that felt earned. 4 months later, beneath a canopy of soft spring blossoms in the backyard garden her grandmother once tended, Celia stood barefoot on the grass, her white dress simple and elegant, her hair pinned with wildflowers. Quinlan stood across from her in a charcoal suit, his expression unguarded. Raw. In love, the ceremony was small, just the people who mattered. The mayor officiated, because of course he did, and Sawyer played guitar softly under the arbor. Mrs. Carter wept openly in the front row. As they exchanged vows, Quinlan took her hands in his. You were never a detour, he said. You were the destination I didn't know I was searching for. I vow to honor the strength that kept you standing, to protect the softness you share only with me, and to choose you every single morning for the rest of my life. Tears shimmered in Celia's eyes, but her voice didn't waver. You taught me that love isn't a burden, it's a shelter. I vow to stand beside you, not behind you, to share in your silence and your storms, and to never let fear decide our future. When they kissed, the crowd erupted. Laughter, cheers, applause. But all Celia heard was the beat of her heart against his. That night, as stars blinked overhead and the garden glowed with candlelight, Quinlan swept her into one last dance beneath the arbor. You know, he murmured, I could buy you a castle, a private jet, a whole island. But this, he gestured around them, this is the only thing I've ever wanted. She leaned in, lips brushing his. You already gave me everything, and he had, because in the end it wasn't the money or the grand gestures. It was the look in his eyes when he saw her, the way he listened without trying to fix her, the quiet steadiness of his love. They built a life from the roots of something broken, and not once did either of them look back. In the years that followed, the community center thrived. Children painted murals on the walls, and teenagers found their voices in poetry classes. Celia's garden bloomed brighter each spring, and Quinlan taught music again, not for profit, but for joy. They never needed the city again. Because everything they ever wanted was already here, in the hills of Willow Creek, where love had come not by chance, but by choice. And every morning, when Celia opened her eyes to the man who had once been a stranger on a train platform, she knew she had finally come home.